The Renaissance introduction, 242, 243, and so on. Very huge movement in history, in British literature history. I'm sure you've heard this before, the term Renaissance man, and so on, and we'll talk more in greater detail about what that actually entails later on. I want to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about the King of England, Henry VIII. He was the main central figure in the early portion of the Renaissance, and then we had, what's his name? Shakespeare, and Queen Elizabeth I really kind of rounded out. So a lot of famous stuff happens. For the most part, our study of the Renaissance kind of stops, around 1600. 1620s, 30s, 40s, we start to have the presence of the Puritans, which we'll talk about later in the next unit, and the Enlightenment, and there's a civil war and stuff like that. Even though you'll notice that the years in these eras somewhat overlap a little bit. It's not like a concrete, this was 103 years, and everybody agrees that the next year started the next era. It's not like that. It's very kind of fluid, okay, and just kind of overlapping to some degree. So I want to talk a little bit about Tudor England. If you look on 242, Tudor is really the family crest of King Henry VIII. You may have heard of Henry VIII from being a king who can't really keep a wife. In Henry VIII, historically, he killed a couple of his wives. Some died on their own, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There was a song, I'm Henry VIII, I am, Henry VIII, I am. You ever hear that one? It just it's around and just goes over and over again. It was famous in the movie Ghost, if you ever saw that, with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore. That was way before you were born. Anyway, so Tudor England, the Tudor monarchy kind of really began after the War of the Roses. The House of York versus the House of Tudors, people were fighting back and forth. We had Edward, and then we had Henry, and Henry VIII's dad kind of fought it. And then when Henry VII died, his son Henry came, and he became king. He was a very young king, a very brash, arrogant king. You will see that he almost single-handedly kind of caused the death of hundreds of thousands of people because of his religious beliefs and convictions and so on. And we'll talk about him in a little bit. The Renaissance, really, it started in Italy. You got to remember, even though this is a class about English history and literature, it started in Italy. Okay, Italy, down there with Rome, just west of Greece, that type of thing. The Renaissance is the rebirth, the rediscovery. And especially in England, this is huge because Rome has been gone. Their influence has been gone out of England for, almost 1,000 years, almost exactly. And when they left, they took all of their culture, all of their literature, all of their education. And so now people in England start to have a rediscovery of the classics. You might have heard of Plato or Socrates, Aristophanes, Euripides, all of these philosophers and playwrights and such. Art. They start to really appreciate those works and those classics and really that kind of era and such. It talks about how they have a renewed interest in science, art, and all learning that had flourished in ancient Greece and Rome. So in the minds of the English and the people that are really the people of the Renaissance who are appreciating this, it's almost like for the last 1,000 years, we haven't done anything. We haven't studied. It's like if we were to forget about Shakespeare for 100 years or 1,000 years. And then we come back to Shakespeare. Oh, wow, look how wonderful. Oh, look at all these other people. Look at this culture. Oh, it was just forgotten for 1,000 years. It's really quite interesting. And so we'll talk about more and see a lot of the classic works later on, sonnets and Shakespeare and so on. Humanism, if you look down there at the bottom, humanism, we alluded to this a little bit when we were talking about a brief history of time, the heroes, brief history of heroes, where it gives the accomplishments, gives credit to the human beings to accomplish great feats in this world. This emphasis on humanities rather than God's importance also threatened the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, which eventually laid the groundwork for the Protestant Reformation. So this is really the first time where people aren't just like, wow, look how amazing we are because of God. It's more about, look what amazing things we're able to do, us human beings. Okay? They're not shunning God, but they are not giving all the credibility to God and all the honor and such. And so this is where we start to really see humans appreciating each other for what they can do and what they can contribute, which is pretty important and pretty relevant. Yeah, on page 243, down the left-hand column, a lot of other neat things that happened. New ideas were appreciated. People were traveling, and so as they travel, they come back with these new stories and new accounts and new cultures, new beliefs, new literary and artistic works and endeavors, and it really kind of helps to perpetuate the culture and really take it out of the Middle Ages and really kind of hit the ground running. You know, writers traveled abroad, brought back England not only new books and new ideas, foreign works were translated into English. So even they brought back stuff, and that was eventually, you know, translated. You know, there's a movie out recently, was it The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo? That's not an American story. That was Swedish. If you well, I saw my mom reading it. She doesn't know Swedish. Well, no, because they take the book and translate it. It's like, you know, the Da Vinci Code. You know, the Dan Brown books, those have sold millions and millions of copies. Not here in America. They go and translate into different, you know, languages and such so that other people can read it. And so we were able to, in England, be able to get influences from other cultures and translate it to English for people. You know, printing presses could start popping these things out and made reading a lot more affordable than what it was before. Because remember, books, you know, were handwritten things. That would cost a lot of money to own a book because somebody spent, what, hundreds of hours maybe? Who knows? Probably not that much. And so the common person wouldn't be able to have a book. But now with the printing press, you can kind of kick those things out pretty rapidly and such. Let's talk a little bit about Henry VIII, him and his wives. It is true, he did marry a lot of women. He divorced a couple of them. Now, this was Roman Catholic England. Now, even Catholics nowadays, do they usually say, yeah, sure, go get a divorce? No. Okay, the answer is no. They would not allow it. He wanted to get a divorce from his first wife, and I'm going to put it up on the overhead here, Catherine of Aragon. Okay? She was, Aragon, excuse me, Aragorn was Lord of the Rings. Weird. Anyways, she was a little bit older than he was. She was Spanish nobility, which means she was, to some degree, royalty. And she couldn't produce him a son. And like any good king, not good, I shouldn't characterize it as good, but any king, any ruler, dictator, whatever, you want to have an heir. You want to have a son. And for some reason, women aren't a good heir to have, because women aren't as powerful as men. I think that we will see with one of his children, Elizabeth, that women are actually, could be much, much stronger rulers than men could. So I really kind of flipped the script on that. So anyways, she couldn't produce him a son. He ran into a lady named Anne Boleyn. Have you heard of that name before? There have been a lot of movies and TV shows in the last few years. The Other Boleyn Girl, Natalie Portman, Eric Bana, Scarlett Johansson. It's about Anne Boleyn, Mary Boleyn, and King Henry. There was a show on Showtime that just wrapped up called The Tudors. If you want to watch it, it was very good. My wife enjoyed it, so I ended up watching it with her, and it was historically accurate, and it was this whole era of his wives, and you see the ups and downs, and it was very good. So anyways, she could not produce him a son. She did produce him a daughter named Mary, and that name will come back. You do not have to memorize all of these. But if you can remember the story and the progress, and why did he do this, and who was the next, it really makes things a lot easier to understand, especially as we get going through the literature, and you get to see the mindset and the struggle of this religious time in this era. And so anyway, she couldn't produce him a son, and so he started to kind of flirt around with this other girl named Anne Boleyn, this little cutie, and she was like, I'm not going to be your mistress, but you know what, if you make me the queen, I will give you a son. And since he can't get a son, she gave him a son, but he died, stillborn. Okay? So there must be something wrong with her. God doesn't want us to have children together. God doesn't want us to be married. Now, obviously, we know that that's just him putting his ulterior motives into play. I mean, it's just like a soap opera, what was going on for these, 20, 30 years. And so he decided, I'm going to divorce her. And I'm going to marry this young girl, Anne Boleyn, so that we can get together and she can give me a son and I can have this hot little wife. That was the goal. That was the intention. And the Pope did not agree with that. He said, you cannot do that. And he's like, I'm King of England. What are you going to do? They're like, well, we're going to excommunicate you. He goes, you can't excommunicate me. I quit. I'm going to make up my own religion. And that's where we get the Anglican Church, the Church of England. Have you heard that phrase before? Okay, so the Church of England was born. Church of England does not, I don't want to say worship the Pope, but it doesn't acknowledge the Pope. Who's the Pope of the Church of England, do you think? The King. And not just am I doing this, but the new country religion is Church of England. It is not Catholicism. Anybody that says it's Catholicism is a heretic who's going against God, and by my religion, you'll be executed. Now, if you were a very strong practicing Catholic, you see there would be an issue with that. You would have a big problem with that. And so he was able to grant his own divorce. The Catholics and the people around the Europe never acknowledged it. So in their mind, Catherine was always the queen. Her daughter Mary was always next in line. It's important to remember that fact. Okay? So, divorced. He gives her a dowry, he gives her some money, and sends her off into the country to live, sends Mary to some school. She's now called Lady Mary, not Princess Mary anymore. And he marries Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn, her one promise to him was, I will give you a son. Doesn't happen. She can't come through with her promises. Things don't play out the way she wants. She is, he's getting very tired of her. He starts to, see this other pretty lady on the side, and he's attracted to her. And there is a rumor going around that Anne Boleyn's having an affair. Now, the king does not stay married to a woman who's supposedly cheating on the King of England. That shouldn't happen. Okay? Rumors had it, especially that it was set out in the Tudor show, that rumors were that it was even her brother was one of the people. They played it off in the show that they just said that to help with the public perception of, oh, well, I can behead her, get rid of her, and marry somebody else. And the public won't have my head about it because she was sleeping with her brother. Incest, wrong. Okay? So I haven't been able to find out exactly if that was true or not, but she was tried and executed for having an affair. And she was practicing the Church of England. So he married Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour was a beautiful, very upstanding individual. He loved her desperately. She gave him, as you see, a son, Edward. Score. Jane died from complications in childbirth. And so he was crushed. But he got his son. And it's his only son. Can you imagine how protective he would be of that? He didn't help raise his son. He sent his son away to be surrounded by one or two people and raised and instructed and taught and schooled, and nobody with a cold can get close to him. I mean, he's just paranoid because he's gone through a lot to get this son. Okay? So he was rushed into marriage to Anne of Cleves from, I believe it was Holland. He was assured that she was beautiful. She shows up, not beautiful. He was married to her anyways. And he kind of divorced that because she's just not very pretty and doesn't want to be around her anymore. So that was a very quick wedding. And that was, hey, I'm Church of England. I don't want to be married. I'll get a divorce. She didn't do anything to be killed. The next one, Catherine Howard, they went and found her, who actually was kind of an off relation, second cousin, something like that, of Anne Boleyn. Found her in an orphanage, very young. I think she was 14, 15, 16, something like that. And he married her. She was very young. They played it up in the show that she was very immature, giggling around with her friends, running around, doing crazy stuff. Not the stuff a Queen of England should do. Okay? Not at all. She eventually did start having an affair with one of his chambermen, one of his lieutenants type guys. and both of those individuals were killed as well. And then lastly, Catherine Parr, he needed somebody who was calm and mature, and so he married her. And notice there weren't any kids produced in these last few marriages. Catherine Parr was married to him for a long time and survived him. Okay, so let's look at all of them. And there's a nice little way of remembering this. How many were there? 6 wives, I think? The first one, Catherine, divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. It's a nice little way of remembering that. Okay? Divorced, beheaded, died in childbirth. Divorced, beheaded, survived. It's kind of a way to remember the story. But the main thing that is so important are these children. Okay? The son, even though he was way at the bottom, was the last one born, he's the first heir because men moved to the front of the line for whatever reason. So when Henry dies, Edward takes over. He's a kid still. He doesn't last very long. He ends up dying, and there's some controversy surrounding his death. Whether there was some shady business behind it. Well, then who becomes king or queen? Because there's no other king. We go back up to Mary, the oldest daughter. Now, the thing that you need to understand during this time period is all of this religion issues going on. If you aren't the Church of England and you're practicing Catholicism and you don't swear your allegiance to the king, you are executed. You're done for. Okay? Now we have Mary who's in charge. Mary's mother was the original queen. Catholic. Mary flips it and says Catholicism is now the main thing. And she goes out and kills all the heretics of Church of England. See how this could be a confusing time for religion? Did you read what her nickname was? Bloody Mary. Have you heard that before? Well, I know it's a drink. My dad drinks it. No, well, it's a red tomato juice alcoholic beverage. It's blood. She was given the name Bloody Mary. She had all this resentment that she should have been. Her mom was always queen. Can you imagine the way that Mary would think about Anne Boleyn? What would Mary think about, all of those other queens? You guys aren't queens. My dad can't divorce my mom. My mom is still queen and I'm still princess. And so when Edward is king, that's wrong. All these other women, that's wrong. And so she and all Catholics, especially in Europe and Spain, where Catherine was from, Catherine of Aragon, Spain thinks that Catherine was always the queen. So when Henry dies, they think that Mary should be the next leader, not some Church of England kid, Edward. They think, wow, our blood is in charge of England. We have this big superpower now. But there was some animosity going back and forth. When Mary eventually did die, we had Elizabeth I, and she's the first person we're going to really focus on in this particular unit. She takes over, and Elizabeth I is considered one of the greatest rulers in England's history, if not the greatest. For women, what an amazing, amazing role model. She never married. Can you blame her? I mean, look at what she grew up with around her dad and all of those moms and stepmoms. She never had any kids, which that causes a problem come her end time, okay, where I don't have an heir. So she eventually does set on a cousin up in Scotland, which is the country on the same island of England, but right above it, James, King James of Scotland. She names him as the heir. So when Elizabeth died, King James of Scotland comes down, and he is now the King of England and the King of Scotland. It's like he united two kingdoms. Where do you think the term United Kingdom came from? Okay? So in referencing England in that area, those countries, it's the United Kingdom, and that's because we have, where are we at here? The Stuarts. So we went from the family of Tudors to the family of Stuarts, and that's where we start with James and his son, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the next unit and so on. But most of the stuff we focus on in this class period deals with, not this class period, but this unit, deals with Elizabeth and James. Okay, Elizabeth, a very strong woman. She did keep lovers around, which we will see, but she just never married. So she was one, I mean, you can't really blame her for not wanting to go down that road. And that's where a lot of that stuff that I just talked about was summarized on the right-hand column. The big ideas, humanists, courtiers, the bard for the ages, the sacred and the secular, a lot of that stuff will come out. We talked about humanism a lot, which is prevalent in 2 of those 3. The bard, Shakespeare, we'll do a couple sonnets and spend time on Macbeth. The difference between the sacred and the secular world, what's going on outside of religion, as opposed to what you should be living. The movements. We'll talk about metaphysical poetry. We'll talk about the Bible being translated into English for the first time. Imagine what that can do for religion. All of a sudden, the Bible is translated into your language. Before that, if you couldn't translate it on your own, you only knew what was in the Bible based on what the preacher people were saying. The Bible says this. Oh, does it? Well, I can't read it, so I must listen to what you say and your interpretation of it. But now when you can read your Bible, and you heard of the King James Bible, right? James I of Scotland. LeBron James is what? King what? King James. You think they just made that name up? It's an allusion to King James. Okay? So we'll get to all of those going on, in greater detail and so on.